And the little cluster of blobs, that looks to me like that's probably Harwell campus. Why are there several? Is that because there's several heat sources, and are the sort of size of them likely to be related to how much heat there is?
Yes, so I should have looked up what the different heat sources were for each of the zones, but I didn't do that before. But I can look up that information if you want afterwards. But yes, basically each zone is associated with a different heat source, and it all depends. The kind of geographic spread of it depends on the amount of heat, and also the kind of potential end users of that heat and their location.
Thank you.
Councillor Houghton.
Yeah, I guess similar to what Councillor James just said, I was just curious on, I'm looking at the two blobs up in the Botley area, and I'm fairly certain one of those is the Brooks campus, which is in the process of closing down. So,
yeah, there's definitely some refinement that needs to happen. This is all done sort of from data gathering and just a computer model. It hasn't had any ground truthing yet, I think, and that's quite evident when you look at this. But that links quite nicely to what some areas that we're currently looking at. So the main area of focus for us at the moment is looking at these zones around Didcot, mainly because we are aware that there's a number of data centre proposals in the area as well, which will produce a lot of waste heat. And we know that this is not currently taken into account within the zoning model. So if the zoning model has already identified potential heat sources in the area, so I'm looking at these ones here on the border between South and Vale, and the heat sources for these are the existing power station and also the treatment works. And we also know that in addition, there's going to be a significant amount of waste heat coming from the data centres proposed for the area. Then together, that's quite a potentially exciting opportunity for a low carbon heat network development. So we are seeking to undertake it's called a techno-economic feasibility study to consider the potential merging and expansion of these proposed heat network zones. And this study will calculate the expected heat that would be available to power a heat network, map out the buildings and developments that might be able to use the heat, do an initial assessment of what type of heat network would be most suitable, and some like high-level concept designs and layout, assess the viability of the network and provide some estimates of capital cost and recommendations for next steps. So those are kind of the main things it will cover. There's also a lot of detail like underneath all of those things, but those are the headlines. Through the process of developing that feasibility study, we will be engaging with all the key stakeholders, including the data centre developers and also nearby businesses and housing developers. It's obviously right on the border between the Vale of Whitehorse and South Oxfordshire, but the key sites sit within the Vale. So that's the kind of council that will be leading it. However, we're going to there'll be significant implications for South Oxfordshire as well. So we'll work together on that. We have applied for some funding to do this study to the government's Heat Network Delivery Unit, and we're expecting to hear the outcome of that very shortly. I'm very hopeful that it will be successful. The main reason that we're kind of progressing this one first is that the potential exists to require data centre developers to provide the waste heat through planning obligations, and that we need to take advantage of the live planning applications essentially and try and capture that opportunity, which is only possible, or it's a lot easier to do prior to those planning applications being determined. So this is very time sensitive. The project is being led by us, the climate team, but we're working very closely with colleagues from planning and economic development, the enterprise zone teams and the garden communities teams. And we hope to be in a position to get this study going by the end of March and then kind of finalising it over the summer in 2026. After that, local government reorganisation is going to make the next steps quite challenging, but the main thing that we are focusing on at the moment is those planning applications. So we'll see how we get on. But in the longer term, this is going to be a very significant infrastructure project, but could have like huge potential to decarbonise heating for lots of homes and buildings in the area. So we're very early stages, but it is quite an exciting project. yeah, that was all I was going to say on that. So happy to try and take any other questions. Councillor Stevens, I can see you've got your hand up.
No, I'm just really excited by this too. So I'm not sure whether that sits in my area or the next person along, but all those data centers, it seems like an absolute opportunity. And I'm just deeply conscious that we don't mess up the timing. And I think you nicely covered it, that you said that now is a good time because they're going through planning and we can get in there. But I've not seen, in all the planning applications, there are loads coming through, I've not seen any mention of heat networks. So just wanted to make sure that you are talking, to all the right people. And then the second thing is that next to that, it looks like that's Milton Park. And Milton Park have got Tokamak, which is supposedly the hottest place on the planet. So I think that they would be an excellent opportunity to take some of their waste heat because they're generating huge temperatures.
We are in conversations with them, and also about them potentially using the heat as well for other buildings.
Okay.
So, yes, we're in touch with them.
Thank you.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. I'm intrigued. What is all the heat being generated near the Watchfield site?
I'd have to go away and have a look at that. I'm sorry, that's not very helpful. I don't have that information.
Nothing that I'm aware of in the planning.
It would that is an existing heat source. It could be a water source or sewage treatment works or something. I don't know the very local area.
The only structure that I'm aware of is a defence academy at Shrivenham, which is sort of in the right area, but I don't know how they're generating so much heat unless it's all the guns. But there you go. But I'd be quite interested. The other question I'd like to ask is about rural heat generation, and is there any plans to look at farming and natural methane waste, etc., heating villages?
Can you hold that thought for the next section of this agenda? Because we have got some questions to do with that on the local area energy plan. It would be great to talk a bit more about it then. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, as Jessie said, the existing heat sources that are suggested for these zones have been something that DESNZ have pulled from various places. I'm guessing that blob over by Watchfield is probably related to the sewage treatment works there, but without actually looking at their data, it's very difficult to tell, to be honest.
Thank you all. Councillor Houghton.
Thank you. I was just wondering, obviously district heating or heat networks, whatever you want to call them, is currently relatively rare in the UK. Do you see how much challenge do you see there being posed by the fact that the expertise isn't necessarily here compared to, as a personal example, my in-laws live just outside Riga, which has got very substantial amounts of district heating powering the city. So I was just curious whether we view the sort of difference in expertise and experience with this technology compared to other places as being a challenge.
I think it will be, and also just it's new for us, isn't it? So there's going to be lots of questions and queries and potential confusion or opposition, but it is increasingly becoming more and more. There's a lot. The government have got I think it's called the Heat Network Zoning Pilot Projects or something like that, which is I think about 25 cities in the country who are all taking forward heat networks. So there is suddenly a flurry of activity, and there's not a lot, going back to the Didcot example, there's not a lot yet in the UK that use data centres to provide waste heat, but there are some that are further ahead than we are. And I have been in touch with officers who are working on them, and they've been very generous with their time and expertise. So we are kind of tied into quite a lot of different networks that are working on this. But yeah, it is new technology for us. But then there are tons of examples from other countries that have been using this technology for years and years very successfully. So hopefully we can learn from that.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask about the end users. Is the government looking, or will your study look at all any of the protections for well, particularly domestic users, but I guess all users of a heat network? Because one of the downsides of a heat network is you've got a single supplier, and they've basically got you over a barrel for any kind of repairs and maintenance costs and the price of your energy, and that would be a concern for me, for residents.
Yes, so that is definitely something that we will be looking at within the study, and you have to make sure that it's a cost-effective option for the residents, and at least no more expensive than an air source heat pump. Yeah, we will definitely be looking into that. There's also, because currently I don't believe that heat networks are subject to the same sort of regulations that other infrastructure providers are, but that is changing, and the government are also looking at that, and I have been kind of trying to keep on top of the knowledge of that as well, and I'm engaging with that process to keep on top of it. So yeah, something we're very, very aware of, and this cannot be this cannot disadvantage residents. This must be a positive thing that we can do. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De La Harpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering about the technicalities of wastewater heat, and how much you can actually get from like a small parish treatment facility. Is that too small? Are we talking only for like a major city that you get enough heat out of the water?
No, I don't know the exact answer to that, but heat networks can be any size. So in the CEAC, the South Oxfordshire CEAC last week, we found out that there are some heat networks in South Oxfordshire that serve about 10 houses or something like that from a central source. So it doesn't necessarily have to be city scale. I think these ones that we're talking about here are large scale, but there are also opportunities for smaller scale schemes and rural schemes. And there, for example, is quite a potentially interesting option to look into for places in conservation areas, because you don't have to have a heat pump outside every house, which is challenging in those kind of protected heritage properties. Whereas a heat network, once the pipes are in, it sort of just is internal to the house, like a boiler would be. So yeah, we definitely also want to have a look at smaller scale schemes, and again we'll talk about that a bit more in the next section, because we're aware that there are some neighbourhood level kind of community groups that have looked into things in the past, and we want to be able to support those things too.
Thanks.
I have to admit, I was slightly surprised by the suggestion of using wastewater treatment plants, because I've looked at these quite a lot in my day job, and my understanding was that heating the water within wastewater treatment plants was one of the biggest costs in running a wastewater treatment plant, simply because of the microbial processes in denitrification and phosphorus removal need the water to be quite warm. But I suppose once that's been done, then the heat can be extracted. Is that the general idea?
I believe so, yes. I'd have to look it up properly, yeah.
Just to come in there, if water source heat pumps, large industrial scale water source heat pumps can be powered by lakes and features like that. So the source of the water doesn't necessarily need to be particularly warm. And I think it's sort of an ambient warmth, that because the whole point of heat pumps is that amplifies that heat up into a level which is then usable. So we've looked at other schemes, for example, in South Oxfordshire in Berrinsfield, where there is a lake there, where there is the potential to develop a water source heat pump. If you're using a wastewater treatment plant, obviously the source temperatures potentially are somewhat higher than that. So they've got a much more attractive opportunity in terms of utilising that waste heat.
There might be a rather large artificial lake near Abingdon if Thames Water gets their way. Are we looking at that at all, or is that too far in the future?
Not yet.
Okay. Councillor De La Harpe.
So this is a question to the chair, really. So do the microbes in a wastewater treatment warm the water through their own biological activity?
No.
Like in a compost heap?
Those reactions exothermic. don't believe so, but I can't remember off the top of my head. If they do, then it's not significant enough to really be of note. I think the key point is that they tend to work best when the water is quite warm, sort of 30, 40 degrees, and you do get what's it called, seasonal denitrification failure. So particularly in the cold winters, particularly in places like North America and Russia and so on, the amounts of ammonia and nitrates flowing out of wastewater treatment plants will be much greater in the winter, simply because the microbes can't remove it as quickly as they can in the summer.
Thanks.
Lisa, having questions directed to me. It's quite nice. All right, thank you. Any more on heat networks, or are we happy to move forward onto the next item? Can see lots of nodding. So this will again be the next item on local area energy plans. Again, will be led by Jessie Freeth. For this one, please can we keep the questions to the end of the update, because there's a workshop afterwards, so we might as well just have the questions in with the workshop. All right, Jessie, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is kind of follows on quite nicely from the previous agenda item. We've talked a few times before at these meetings about the local area energy plan, so I'm just going to give a bit of a recent progress update and then present a few of the initial findings from the modelling. We're currently in the throes of a lot of different stakeholder discussions, and there are a lot of comments and ideas being thrown around for what could be included in our local area energy plan. So we wanted to use the session today as a bit of a sounding board to sense check particular questions that have come up. So I'll get to that at the end, but yeah, I'll just give a short update to start with. So as a reminder, the local area energy plan, or LEAP as we call them, is a strategic framework that sets out how a local area will transition to the current energy system that we have to a net zero energy system. It brings together technical analysis, so detailed data collection and modelling, with a lot of local stakeholder engagement to produce a detailed plan for how we make that transition. So how we decarbonise energy use from across electricity, heat, transport, buildings and agriculture. We are trying to work out the best way of making that transition, while also supporting the growth ambitions of the county. It will also inform and enable an equitable energy transition that benefits all stakeholders, for links to your comment earlier, Councillor James, and also focuses on building the council's internal knowledge and capacity on energy planning, as this is going to be increasingly important in the coming years. The OXLEAP, so Oxfordshire Local Area Energy Planning Programme, was commissioned by what was the Future Oxfordshire Partnership, now the Oxfordshire Leaders Joint Committee, in 2023, and we are working together with all the other Oxfordshire local authorities on this. The County Council are the kind of contract holder, and they are project managing it, and the consultants that we're working with are Arup and Global City Futures. We've split the programme into sort of 3 phases that you can see on the screen here. Phase 1 was all about building the picture, so gathering that baseline data on the current energy system and then modelling what is possible and what needs to be done at a county level. Phase 2, which is where we are now, is about creating those tailored local area energy plans for each district and identifying the priority projects. And there will also be a kind of county-wide summary as well. And then phase 3 is about how do we actually make it happen? So how do we support delivery of these plans? How do we improve our capacity and capabilities to deliver these? So we're calling that kind of creating the OXLEAP function, and hopefully means that we don't have to keep commissioning expensive consultants every few years to refresh it, and that we can do that internally. That is what we're aiming for. So we've now completed phase 1, and the main deliverables from that were the baseline and the modelling, which I'll talk more about in a minute. And we're now into phase 2. The phase 2 deliverables, so the district specific local area energy plans, are due for delivery in April next year. And we're doing a lot of stakeholder engagement at the moment. This is the kind of stage we're at. We're also already, like, phase 3 isn't really like a following on, it's already starting now. So we're already working and scoping out what we need to do to build that up. So let me move on to the next one. I'm just going to present very, very briefly some of the sort of highlights of the energy modelling. There is a lot more detail, and we have got some kind of slides from Arup that kind of present it all, which we can share as well if anyone is interested. But in the interest of time tonight, I've just picked out a few key things to talk about. Yeah, there are other things that are covered, so that it also talks about heat networks a lot, which we've already talked about, so I'm not going to mention that again. There's a whole section on community energy, there's a whole section on equitable transition. So if you have any questions, I can try and answer them at the end, but these are not, I haven't included everything here. In terms of the modelling approach, there are 3 main steps. Step 1 was defining the nature and the scale of the future energy system. So it takes the targets that we have already agreed through things like the Pathways to Zero Carbon Oxfordshire and the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan, which we worked on a few years ago. They included specific targets in them already. So this has taken those, updated them where necessary, and then kind of used those as the assumptions to take this forward. In step 2, the supply and demand inputs that were sort of set by step 1 were disaggregated to primary substation level. So this is, I can't remember exactly how many primary substations there are in the Vale, but it's about 15 or something like that. And there was also a renewable energy assessment that was carried out at this stage using criteria for the exclusion of certain land areas. So sort of assessing where is suitable for renewable energy generation. And that was used the same methodology that was used in the evidence base for our joint local plan. And then finally, in step 3, we had interim targets and deployment curves developed for each technology type and sector. And they kind of represent the most probable uptake of technologies, and also how likely something is going to happen based on sort of behavioural change, anticipated behaviour change, social and policy drivers, and also technological availability. So moving on, this is kind of the overview trajectory and pathway to net zero by 2050 for Oxfordshire. You can see this here, business as usual line will result in only a 16% reduction in emissions by 2050. This is from decarbonisation of the grid alone, and that obviously leaves a huge gap to meeting net zero. In comparison, this is the Oxfordshire leading the way scenario, which is the kind of the pathway that we have decided to follow, which will lead to a 98% emissions reduction by 2050. And this is through decarbonising heating, transport and agriculture and many other things. These are the sort of 8 themes that the LEAP is going to cover. I'm just going to pick out a few of these now. Moving on, yeah. So this is this chart here shows the distribution of energy performance certificates ratings in South and Vale. You can see there are sort of large areas of green in the Vale, but this is mostly influenced by new housing that has been developed already. So it does kind of cover up quite a lot of local nuances. So it's an interesting thing to look at, but it's not necessarily the full picture. But it does kind of give us a few high-level areas that we could look to focus on. In terms of like looking further into the detail, EPC ratings do not tell the whole picture, and there are in the Vale 82% of properties still using gas boilers and a further 6% using oil. But it's not also going to be enough to just switch over to electric heating. We also need to a 56% heat demand reduction in homes in order to meet net zero. You can't just switch and not do any of the other retrofitting work as well. In terms of transport, yeah, you can. This is kind of just a map of the key transport areas. You can see here in this pie chart that only 2% of vehicles are currently battery electric, whereas 91% of current vehicles are either petrol or diesel. The modelling shows that, as well as the shift to electric vehicles, there will also need to be more of a shift to public transport and active transport, and also a reduction in personal vehicle miles by a third. Oh, sorry, wrong way. This map shows the current grid constraints, and the areas of red are substations that are already overloaded. So this is obviously the work that needs to be done by the distribution network operators. So in our case, that's SSEN. But it sort of shows the scale of the issues that we're facing already, and that's even before we are trying to decarbonise and generate renewable energy and all of those things. So this is something that's a really big barrier at the moment to progress, and what the LEAP is hopefully going to be used to kind of provide evidence of need for upgrades in the future, more accurately than the information that we currently provide to the DNOs. Yeah, that's probably. And then the final one, oh, sorry, go back. There we go, renewable energy. So this map here has a lot of detail, but it shows the size of installed and planned solar farms, and also areas that are suitable for solar and wind energy. Previously, when we've done energy modelling or kind of set targets for renewable energy generation, wind energy has pretty much been discounted due to sort of national government policy making it very difficult to develop wind farms. But that has changed now, and so this modelling does include wind as a potential source of electricity generation in the future. Wind turbines generally have what's called a sort of what's the word? More basically, they create more generation for the capacity that they have. So, in theory, are a good part of the mix. But we'd like to talk about that in a minute and get your views on that. In terms of details to do with the VOWH, at the moment we have 130 megawatts of solar PV installed, 11.6 megawatts of landfill gas processing capacity across 2 facilities, and also 6.5 megawatts of installed capacity at Westmill Wind Farm. But we do need to increase this by 10 times by 2050 to up to 1,400 megawatts. And yeah, as I said, that future capacity will be split between ground PV, roof-mounted PV, and wind turbines. Currently, across Southern Vale, there's a combined 180 megawatts of ground PV projects in the planning system, and 130 megawatts of that is in the Vale, so more than half. Yeah, that's moving on. So moving on to the sort of discussion point part, about a month ago, we had our South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse action planning workshop for the local area energy plan. This was a sort of brainstorming session where attendees were asked to propose ideas to include in our local area energy plan. It was a kind of blue sky thinking, no silly ideas workshop. It was really successful. We had around 40 people attend from a wide range of local organisations, including lots of sort of community representatives, housing developers, social housing representatives, and a lot of council officers and members. And yeah, we have had a long list of things that we now are working through. We've got a few questions that were proposed during this session and also during sort of subsequent conversations that we would appreciate your thoughts on, so that we can think about them as we rationalise and refine down the ideas that we have received. So I've got some questions. I've grouped them together into 3 slides. So I thought it would work best if I introduce each set of questions quickly, and then we can have a short discussion and hear your thoughts. And also happy to try and answer any questions as well as we go, if you have any. So the first kind of set of questions is about renewable energy and energy infrastructure. So the local area energy plan is not going to propose any specific sites for any renewable generation. That's a planning decision. But it does map areas that are potentially more suitable in the same way that the Joint Local Plan Evidence Base did. Today, we wanted to get a sense check from the committee here about levels of support for wind energy, and whether you think that it does have a role in sort of renewable energy generation within the Vale of Whitehorse. Worth bearing in mind, if there were no wind turbines developed, then we would need more solar farms to reach the renewable energy generation targets. So it's kind of about that balance, and would just appreciate to hear your honest thoughts. And then the second part of that is around energy infrastructure. It's a very technical topic, and one that we are still trying to get our heads around and not always succeeding. Do you have any suggestions about how we should be engaging with the public on this? And also with businesses. So we, as well as the local area energy planning process, there's quite a lot of other wider energy planning work that is going on in terms of from the distribution network operators, so SSEN in our case, and also the newly established National Energy Strategic Operator. We are responding to a lot of consultations and requests for information from them. And as well as asking us as local councils, they are also approaching sort of larger businesses to provide information about their future energy needs so that they can capture that in their models and their kind of forecasting for future demand. It's a very technical ask, and most businesses do not have the in-house knowledge to be able to do that. In the last year, we have been supporting some businesses. We've literally sat down with them and gone through the spreadsheets provided that they have been asked to complete. But there's probably more we can do, and maybe more effective ways we can do that. That is easier for us, because obviously we can't sit down with every single business and go through it with them, but also that's a kind of self-selecting process. So we'd be keen to hear your thoughts about how we could potentially better engage with businesses and try and share some knowledge and offer support in a manageable way. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts, but I'll open it up to members first. Need some thinking time. I can. Councillor Stevens.
You're on mute.
So just really supportive. I think there's loads of opportunities for wind, and I don't think it needs to be massive wind turbines anymore. I was involved in a trial where the wind turbine vertical axis one was only 2 or 3 meters high, and like if you could imagine wind turbines where chimneys are on houses, you know, that's going to be substantial. So the use of buildings and wind, I think, is interesting. And also car parks too. I don't know, but I think you mentioned car parks earlier, or certainly solar on car parks is mentioned quite a bit, but actually they're also quite windy places. So, you know, having wind on car parks, you know, brownfield places where it really doesn't matter what it looks like. I think there's loads of opportunity for wind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor James, you're next.
Yeah, so I think more wind energy is a great idea, and I am a volunteer guide actually at Westmill Wind and Solar Farms, and the wind farm, I'm just having a quick look in my guiding notes. So the wind farm is a 6.5 megawatt wind farm, and the solar farm is a 5 megawatt solar farm. The wind farm generates, I think, roughly twice what the solar farm generates in a year, even though it's only a little bit bigger in its peak capacity, and it takes up much less land. It's hardly any land compared to the solar farm. Not that that is, by modern standards, a big solar farm now. What I would say though is that I don't think that would have happened at Westmill if it hadn't been a community owned one, because if you are a commercial investor and you are looking at the UK, Oxfordshire does not have the best wind speeds. However, if you look at Oxfordshire compared to like mainland Europe, where there's wind turbines all over, the UK as a whole has fantastic wind speeds. So rubbish UK wind speeds, as we've got in Oxfordshire, are actually still very good compared to a lot of places where they do commercially run wind turbines. So I'm not sure that they will come forward in a purely commercial way, but if it was possible that they could come forward, and I mean, for example, Westmill is old now, and from what I've heard, is certainly looking into its options for potentially, what comes next, whether they can in fact replace the turbines. So, Peter, I have to absolutely disagree. From coming from a background with some having done some energy knowledge, including wind energy and things, it really does matter how tall they are. They do not get any energy at roof level, and it's very turbulent low down as well, so they're pretty trashed pretty quickly as well. So in fact, one of the things that I believe Westmill Wind Farm were finding is that if they do replace their turbines, they will be 2 to 3 times larger than the current turbines, because that is what you can buy now. You cannot buy turbines the size of Westmill anymore commercially. They just don't make sense. So I think they will be bigger, but you'll get a hell of a lot more power for far fewer turbines. And I'm not sure that bigger is worse. I think that possibly in terms of looking across a view, particularly from a distance, if you've only got like 2 turbines instead of 10, it just looks a lot less. So I really would encourage allowing the possibility of wind energy. Whether it will come forward commercially, I think, might be a different question. But I think it really has got a role, and importantly, it does its best generation typically in winter, which is when we need more energy, which of course solar just can't ever.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Bentley. Councillor Bentley, you're on mute.
Sorry, couldn't find the right button. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Yeah, far away.
Yes, good. Okay. I'll say hi. That was really interesting, Councillor James, because I concur. Also, we need to remember that the Westmill, being a community project, allow public access. So actually, in terms of recreational activity around that site, it's really important in the local area there for dog walkers and children's groups and nature recovery, etc. So I wholly endorse your statement. My comment really was more about I absolutely agree we should be engaging and encouraging businesses, but we know from experience it doesn't actually really translate into activity and action unless you make it a provision of the planning. We don't have every single house with solar, and I remember sitting in on a reserved matters planning meeting where the developers just shook their heads and said, well, you can't make us do it. We don't want to do it, and it's expensive to do it. I think asking for goodwill and for developers and businesses to do the right thing in the current economic climate is perhaps a little bit fantasizing, but I agree in principle, and I think we should be trying to enforce it every which way with regard to planning.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Councillor Delahunt.
Yeah, I remember seeing a few years ago a report within this council. It had a map of the Vale and showing where the best opportunities were for wind. And it seemed to me that they were there weren't that many because of things like Benson Airfield, that we have to be a lot of space around military airfields. But I remember them mostly being clustered around where the reservoir is going to be, if it does come to be. And I think, are we missing an opportunity that shouldn't the reservoir have wind turbines all the way around the embankment? I was disappointed when they had their engagement meetings that they did talk about reusing the energy as the water flowed out the reservoir, and a few solar panels floating, but it's a massive opportunity that we can grab. And I don't know if anything's being looked into on that side.
I suspect they'd have quite serious concerns around the structural stability of the embankments and so on. Having these large turbines on top being buffeted by the winds might cause issues for the strength of the embankments. That would be my speculative response to that. I'm not a reservoir engineer, so
I just thought I'd put this map back up because this, I didn't really highlight it properly earlier, but this light blue colour is the bits that it says. This key is slightly misleading because it says low suitability. That doesn't mean unsuitable, it just means we don't have, as I think it was Councillor James said earlier, we don't have any really high suitable areas, but these are still suitable potentially. That makes sense. So there's all of this, and I think this might be, I can't remember exactly, but the VOWH has the highest potential of anywhere in Oxfordshire for wind energy.
Okay, and from this map,
apologies for coming in. Just worth pointing out there that you can see that the areas to the south are actually greyed because that's the North Wessex Downs National Landscape, so that's a constraint. So theoretically, those are well suitable. Unfortunately, it's only the areas outside of the AOL or the national landscape.
Sorry, I was
which
looking at the wrong colour. Yeah. That's my bad. It's these bits,
And that's not where the reservoir is going to be. So I was mistaken. Thank you. Well, I say is going to be. Hopefully not, but I don't know if we can stop it.
Councillor Bentley, you've got your hand up. Is that still a legacy from before?
Apologies, it's a legacy hand, so I can get rid. Thanks.
Councillor Stevens.
I was just thinking that we should still ask about CESRO, about whether there's an opportunity to have wind turbines there. I think it's a good idea.
Well, the consultation is open, so do respond.
Yeah, I mean, but in terms of kind of talking to them properly as officers rather than.
Councillor James, did you want to come in or?
So it's sort of on the second question, if that's okay. Now, the about sort of communicating about energy infrastructure, I think.
I think we're covering this whole slide in one go. So
okay, so I was just going to flag that Westmill is it is available for people to visit, and does have a sort of proactive. It has a charity associated with it, Westmill Sustainable Energy Trust, which is who I volunteer for when I guide. So they do sort of proactively offer tours and things. Now, obviously, that only kind of meets people halfway. They have to have an interest to bother to go there to see that. But that's certainly, so there's a resource there that that we could be using and encouraging people to use to go and see infrastructure up close and get a feel for it. In terms of you said that there's difficulty sort of getting sort of large businesses to respond on their energy needs. Is that sort of any large business, or is it ones that we think have? Because I would have thought like data centers and things like that, they'd want to know they've got enough energy locally, because I know there's a lot of those coming forward in the area, and I know places like this, like sort of Harwell campus, and I expect the other science campuses have you know, specific sort of high energy uses that are coming forward?
So it's exactly those type of things that we're interested in, and NESO, the National Energy Strategic Operator, are interested in, not ones that have already put in a application for grid capacity, but ones that are coming further forward that have like slightly more uncertainty. And we have engaged a bit with Harwell, but there's probably others as well that are missed. It's basically businesses that are either have big decarbonisation plans, so therefore going to have a big shift away from gas and using a lot more electricity, or particular industries which are very energy intensive, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not much of a comms expert, I'm afraid, on how to actually get people to engage on that. Yeah, I mean, there might be a role for us as councillors, I guess, to communicate things outwards in our wards a bit, perhaps.
Yeah.
A quick question from me before we go to Councillor Stevens. When you say a large business, large in what regard? Number of employees, annual revenue, or are we thinking more about energy use?
In this context, energy use, really. So anything significant that, is sort of a more than just your average building energy use. It's high intensity kind of thing. So it wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a big business with lots of employees, but.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
So I was just saying that I'm already harping to the local parish councils about leaps and trying to think about my area as a case study, so as a kind of showcase, really, because I've got Didcot Power Station, so and also a massive waste site that's doing energy from waste, that's got plans, for lots of solar and lots of batteries. So it's all the time it's coming up, energy and energy systems with the local communities, but unfortunately, most people would prefer to have sort of green fields and footpaths than battery storage. So it still feels like an uphill struggle. But I think sort of trying to promote Oxfordshire, the Science Vale, as being truly innovative in this space and leveraging things like Milton Park and Tokamak and quantum computing and all the other stuff, and saying the benefit of that is that we're going to have this really great future energy system, and we can showcase and get inward investment. I think making it a bigger story than just energy helps.
Since Councillor Stevens has mentioned battery storage, one of the thoughts that came to me early on was that you mentioned around wind energy, and there's been this big discussion in the national news about how a lot of wind turbines, particularly offshore, have to be turned off during high winds because there's too much supply and the grid can't cope. It strikes me, I'm not an expert in these matters, but it strikes me that there's been this headlong rush into renewable energy generation, which is a good thing, but that storage has been rather neglected, and that it's a crucial component of the switch to renewables.
Yeah, so I didn't present all the modelling results, but the LEAP is also looking at energy storage, and there will be, I don't have the figures with me, so I'd have to look it up, but there will be sort of targets for amount of battery storage that we would need as well.
And is that something that you can see as something centralised, that you have these big facilities with battery storage, or is it something we see being more, individual homes having their own battery, or a mixture? What's the thinking there?
I'm not actually sure, but I would probably say both. Right. Yeah.
And is there something we can do to encourage or even support households to get their own battery storage?
Again, I think it's probably it's a sort of comms thing and explaining why we need it, and people who are very savvy on this type of thing actually kind of use it to save a lot of money on their energy bills and take advantage of flexible tariffs and all this kind of thing. But that's quite niche at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Unfortunately, the less electricity you use as you try and cut your consumption down, it then makes moving to a greener solution, the time scale to pay back gets much longer. So it's sort of it does sort of counteract itself. I had a question about large supermarkets, for example. I don't know how much energy a supermarket consumes, but I guess if it's heated in winter, it must be quite a lot. And then they have huge parking bays, huge parking areas, huge rooftops. And I guess that's dealing with the big corporations like the Tesco's of this world. And maybe a council like ourselves is small fry to them. I don't know how much clout we have with big supermarket chains.
It's, to be honest, not something we've tried yet, but or at least we haven't. I think some conversations are happening with some big retailers at the county level, but I don't know a lot of detail on that yet. But it's a really good point.
Thank you. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the information we're getting from the large businesses, how much is that being pushed by central government to share that information with us as well as with the energy operators, or is that just us trying to help them out? How much of it is push, how much of it is pull? Where is that direction coming from? Is it more us? Is it more central government?
So I think in Oxfordshire we're being very proactive, and most local authorities are not getting involved in this at all. We are doing a lot because we're doing the local area energy plans, and we've got we're kind of trying really hard to engage with these kind of more strategic energy planning processes. We are doing our best to support others, but I think that's unusual. It is in theory coming from central government, but I don't believe it's currently being pushed out that widely.
Okay, thank you.
Out of curiosity, Jesse, are we or the county council partnering with any of the business schools in the county, so the Said and University of Oxford or Oxford, to look at this together with them? Yes,
I think each so the city, for example, have been working with the universities to support them to submit their energy needs as well. And they are definitely involved in the Zero Carbon Oxfordshire partnership, which is sort of looking at all of this as well. So yes.
Thank you. I didn't mean directly on the university's energy needs, but rather that the business schools will conduct surveys and so on with businesses around the county, and using them as a vehicle to gather information and so on.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, we do definitely try and promote that as well. So there's the Energy Solutions Oxfordshire, which is part of Oxford Brookes University. They provide surveys, energy surveys to businesses, and also to community groups and things like that. So yeah, we do try and support that and point people in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Shall I move on to the next questions?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Some of these are quite similar, so hopefully we can rattle through them, and they kind of touch on things we've talked about already. But we know that retrofitting homes is going to be a huge challenge in the districts. I think, as I said earlier, something like 80% of homes still use gas boilers, and trying to sort of scale up retrofitting action is going to be a big part of what we need to do over the next 30 years or so. Can be most cost effective or sort of get the ball rolling a bit more when it's delivered at scale or at a neighbourhood level. And we want to use the leap to look into opportunities for potentially suitable areas for neighbourhood level retrofit schemes. And we're not saying the council is going to be able to directly support or implement a neighbourhood level scheme, but we want to sort of look into options and see what's possible, really. So it might be an area that has a particularly high level of interest, a lot of engaged people already, and maybe that's kind of an interesting pilot to roll out roll out a neighbourhood level retrofit scheme, or maybe it's an area with lots of similar houses that all require similar work, and whether there's some economies of scale there, or an area of particular need, for example, an area of fuel with lots of the high level of fuel poverty. So just really wondering if you had any suggestions or of communities that could be suitable for those kind of neighbourhood level schemes. And similarly, we were talking about heat networks earlier, and we briefly touched on small scale heat networks. We know that there are some smaller villages in the district that have previously looked at feasibility for village level heat networks. So again, are there any that you think could be looking into this or would like to look into it, and whether we could support them in any way? And then on a similar kind of community level theme, we've done a lot of work already as a council to decarbonise our own council-owned buildings, and we've got a lot of decarbonisation work going on at our leisure centres and stuff. But there are a lot of other public buildings in the districts that will need to be decarbonised. And we do already try and support this as much as possible through our grant schemes and things like that. But is there anything else that we could do to support the decarbonisation of community buildings? Thank you.
Quick thought that occurs to me while others are thinking. How suitable, how necessary is retrofitting in sort of 1960s housing estates? It could possibly be as simple as having a look at various different maps for when housing was built. And I know within Marcham, say, there is a swathe of housing that was built in the 1960s. If that is a suitable target for retrofitting, then perhaps that might be not the answer, but an answer would be to simply look at when housing was built in a particular decade or so and start from there. Or is that the wrong way of going about things?
Well, no, that could be a good way of doing it, or it would be looking at areas where they were all built at the same time and therefore all likely to be quite similar, for example. Yeah.
Councillor James.
I'd had a similar thought that actually those 50s. So I should say my day job, I do home energy advice visits to people who are struggling with their bills, and I would say those 50s, 60s council housing estates are a place where you get quite a lot of housing that will be of at least similar construction together, and they absolutely need an upgrade. They're not. Even those with cavity walls and have had cavity wall insulation added since, they're not great on energy efficiency usually, unless they've had a lot more done to them than that. They're still complex because now they are, of course, in all kinds of mixed ownership forms, and even where they're even the ones that are still social housing might be owned by a multitude of housing associations by now. So there's, I don't think there's anywhere completely straightforward anymore after the council house sell off, but I also think those are areas where it could make a real difference to bills actually, and to those households potentially, in some of those areas, because there is some overlap between those and areas where there's higher levels of deprivation, although not entirely at all. The other areas that I thought might benefit from domestic retrofit at sort of neighbourhood level, and also possibly from small scale heat networks, is where people are off gas grid, because those are harder to harder to treat, and they're probably not going to be suitable for something like electrification of heat unless they are also retrofitted. It depends, but they're often older houses, or there's a good core of older houses there. That was my thoughts so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens?
So I'll probably just mirror some of that, but I think, housing associations are an obvious place to start, or any developer that has a large number of properties. I think there are some specialist installers who are looking for So I was dealing with one called Sustain that are looking to, come in and do large scale retrofit and improvement programs. So I think there are new businesses coming out that might help. I might just wonder about some of our housing stock is just too poor to be worthwhile, and like I think in some cases it might be better to knock some houses down and build proper ones. But so that was it really.
On that note, Councillor Stevens, I think some housing associations are already going through a programme of retrofitting, so they've already had the grant there, but perhaps not all.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. Yeah, my issue, I recognise I'm still banging the same drum, but there are still houses being built that need retrofitting because the developers aren't prepared to build in the future proofing, i.e. putting solar on the roof, putting heat pumps in, and their answer is it's too expensive. But when challenged, they will, if you've ordered a brand new house and you want solar putting on, it's more expensive to have solar put on when you bought the house than when they're building the house. Some people buy their houses and they're not even built yet. So there must be some scheme where if any house is built that doesn't have sustainability, eco, proofing in it, we can, as a council, say we can help you put that in. Not necessarily financially, because it saves them doing it when it's already built, if you know what I mean. So basically, developers that I spoke to in a kind of informal way said, well, we don't have the skills or the knowledge. We just build the houses that we're told to build and the people buy them. And then if they then want to put solar on the roof, they find out it's not suitable, or and it's like, that's madness, because people are buying these houses, and if for an extra £1,000 they could get £3,000 worth of solar roofing done, I'm sure they would consider that. I wouldn't say necessarily do it, but there must be some way of making the developers look more sensibly about building things that individual homeowners or housing associations can have an input to, rather than retrofitting. I mean, one would hope that less and less of that is happening now, because more planning is going through with these things added. But we're still, some of these houses had planning permission issued 7-8 years ago, and then they've not got built in that future proofing. The other question or point I'd like to make really is about capacity. So, for instance, I personally have solar on my roof and I have 2 batteries. I generate so much electricity when the sun shines, it would be worth me having 3 or 4 batteries. But nobody can give me a sensible conversation about how to do that, because my batteries and my system is relatively old now. And when I speak to companies, they want to sell me shit. And I don't know whether what I'm asking is a reasonable thing. I have a relatively good knowledge of what is involved, because 3-4 years ago I would consider myself a bit of an expert, because I was going to spend a lot of money doing this. But now the technology has moved forward, and they're telling me that I can't link my system to my system's too old to add batteries to the system. Frankly, I don't believe it. But finding out that knowledge, so I think there's a bit of a kind of free, impartial, can I put solar on my roof? It's not south facing. Can I add batteries to my already batteried system? I don't know anything about solar heat pump, solar pumps, ground source heat pumps, or eco fuel, and I think as an individual, having somebody who can impartially tell me about these systems without trying to sell me something would be really useful. And there's a lot of curious people that don't want to spend a lot of money on something that isn't the right thing. Do I know the community? How big or small are you looking?
Sorry, I lost my mouse. Actually, no set
Okay.
size. Could be a handful of houses or sort of a.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably if we put this forward to council, a lot of individual councillors would be prepared to ask their parishes. I mean, I think we could all off the top of our head roll out some areas that we think are suitable, but it's no good if we don't have some buy-in. It would waste a lot of time, officers trying to find out. But I think there may well be areas that would be keen if you could give us some outline parameters of what you wanted.
I'll have to go away and write those down.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. It's a great thought there. Just to comment on your first point about new builds needing retrofitting, I think that problem would be at least partially solved if we could get our joint local plan approved. But we all know how torturous that's been. Councillor De La Harpe.
Yeah, I was struck by a statistic, and I can't remember the exact figures, about the wealthiest 1% of people in the world generate as much carbon dioxide as the other 99%. And I know we're in a very wealthy area, but perhaps there are a few people in this area who leaving the heating on all day, no problem, no skin off their back, they can afford it. They can afford a gas guzzling car, blah, blah, blah. I think there is also an element of tackling the very wealthy and nudging them towards making improvements which may not occur to them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shaw. Councillor Shaw, you're on mute.
I know I'm on mute. I was trying to get off mute. Sorry. No, 2 points really coming from what Kira was saying. I mean, I think under our current local plan, we require developers to provide sort of reasonably energy efficient properties. I mean, a lot of them do actually provide solar panels on roofs, I'm glad to say now, and also provide air source heat pumps, because I don't think any of them now actually provide developments with gas. So yes, to go back to what Rob was saying, it does have to be a requirement under your local plan, but I think that ours already does have reasonable requirements on that front. The other point about that Kira was essentially saying, how do you find out, whether what you do about batteries, or how you just make your home more energy efficient. Whitney and Abingdon College have a section that actually trains people to install air source heat pumps, do solar panels. I'm not sure whether it does. Can't even think of the word, sorry, getting a senior moment. But I mean, they do a lot on energy efficiency of various kinds. Would it be possible to approach them to see whether they could, or the lecturers could actually provide talks to local community groups, community centres, that sort of thing, about, what you might need, how you get somebody to actually come along and assess what you can feasibly do at the sort of income you've got. Just a thought.
Thank you. I think we'll just take Councillor Stevens and Councillor James, and then we'll wrap up this slide, if that's okay. Councillor Stevens.
I was just thinking in terms of planning that I thought that the building regulations were going to be updated about now, and they were going to mandate that no new house could be built with a gas boiler, and they'd all need to be air source heat pumps, and that would really help. And I thought that had been watered down to some extent, and I just wondered whether you could just update, what's happening with the regulations. Are they going to force builders to do the right thing? And the other thing I was just thinking about was in terms of heat networks, it would be good if we could find some anchor assets. So I don't know, a factory that generates heat with some houses around it, and then there would be a win-win opportunity.
Just on the future home standards, I think is what you're thinking about. Is I can't remember the latest, but it is due to be introduced shortly. I don't want to say the wrong information, so I'd have to go away and check what the latest announcements were. But yes, it is due to be implemented shortly.
Good.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. So, final question from Councillor James on this slide, please.
So just a comment on the final point about decarbonising community buildings, that there is Low Carbon Hub in Oxfordshire, and so they do offer, I believe, funding for both the study, the visit, or a certain number of visits a year to help buildings understand what they can do, and then the potential opportunity to apply towards grants to actually do that. And Westmoor Solar might have something similar.
Thanks.
Can I just really quickly say, I understand that the rules and the recommendations are now, and that planning shouldn't go through for any development that doesn't have some compensation. But there's a lot of houses that haven't been built yet that have been granted planning many years ago. I'm thinking particularly of Grove and Farringdon, and it would be definitely worth looking at old outstanding planning permissions that have been granted but not built yet, because I reckon you could retrofit, as in the houses aren't built, so work with a developer to retrofit things that would be worthwhile.
Okay, thank you. Might be worth taking that up with Councillor Smith in her cabinet position. All right, thank you, Jessie. You got one more slide, I think.
Yeah, one more, but this can be very, very quick. So we have been, throughout the LEAP engagement process, we have been trying to engage with representatives from the agricultural sector, but we haven't had as much engagement as we would have liked. So my final question is, do you have any suggestions on who we can engage with to gain a better insight into agricultural transition to net zero? Just to add, we're only looking at energy use rather than sort of wider agricultural activities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's kind of a separate conversation. Happy to take suggestions here. And also, if anyone thinks of anyone else in the future, please, you can just drop me an email or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bentley's hand is a legacy one.
It is a legacy, but as usual, I do have something to say. Have you tried the young farmers groups? There's several young farmers, and they may not be in a position to influence just yet, but they'll have some great ideas of who you should be talking to.
Great idea, thank you. Councillor Horton?
So my recommendation, I know you said it's more on the energy use side rather than the greenhouse gas emissions, which is what I was thinking originally, but I would actually recommend having a chat with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, because I was at a fantastic webinar a few weeks ago where they were talking about, it was looking at the greenhouse gas emissions side of things, but they were looking at how different methods of detecting methane emissions from farms and explaining the different methods that they've been trying. And the Process Industries Division has similar has that level of interest into the energy side of things as well. It just wasn't something I've looked at recently. So,
yeah, thank you, Councillor Stevens.
Yeah. So I listened to a really interesting presentation from a farmer called Ed Horton and Sons, and they run a lot of farms across Oxfordshire, and they're really into regen ag. And so they would be good people to talk to. and I could introduce you if you like. They're really into it. I know they're into the whole piece, and you just want the energy piece, but I think that they would be supportive. And they advise Savills, so they advise. I think they try to advise other farmers. And there's an organisation called, is it FarmEd? Somewhere in Oxfordshire, there's an organisation that you probably know
that's in
of
West
already.
Oxfordshire, yeah, yes, I think so.
But it might be worth having. So I'm pretty sure that Horton has got farms in South and Vale as well as West.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Yeah, I was going to recommend agriculture engineers, of which I am one, or I trained as one. I think Cirencester would be a good starting place, the University of Cirencester, or there's another one near Bedfordshire. I can't remember the name. Also, I can look it up and let you know.
Thank you. Councillor James.
So yeah, just a couple of thoughts. There is a nature-friendly farming network, and whilst obviously they are perhaps more looking at the biodiversity side, they do seem to be very climate focused. So I know some of the local farmers here are involved in that. I think I've got the right network, and I feel like they would be the most likely to be engaging with this, although they are looking at the whole sort of carbon cycle thing a lot more as well, and the land use. And the other thing was, I mean, I know a couple of farmers who potentially be interested, but I mean, I don't want to put them on the spot. Is there sort of a contact that councillors could, is there like a little piece or something that you could say, if you know any farmers who are interested in this, please let them know, and then I could pass the information out to them rather than the other way around.
Yes, I could do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Good idea, thank you. All right, I think that's been a really useful discussion, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I think, Jessie, you might be able to collapse on the heap and have a rest now. Oh, that's good. Councillor Horton, it's very quick.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I had to go and check because it's an organisation my father's a member of and I couldn't remember what it was called. It's the Association of Lecturers in Agricultural Machinery. Would also be probably a very good organisation to talk to.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, should we move on to item 9 on the agenda, where Jessie gets a rest and Dominic talks us through the nature-based carbon sequestration project and gives an update on that. And for this one, if we could save questions for the end, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so some of you may remember me mentioning this project quite a while ago now. So the project has run for 18 months and it's just come to an end literally at the end of November. In fact, we're still doing some final tidying up. So this is pretty much hot off the press and I'm going to give you a bit of insight into the findings. So you'll all be aware that all of the Oxfordshire local authorities have targets to be net zero by 2030, and we're all pushing ahead as fast as we can with our decarbonising our operations. But I think everybody recognises that in order to meet some of these early net zero targets, we're not going to be able to reach zero carbon emissions. There's a whole bunch of hard to decarbonise areas, which the only way realistically we would be able to reach zero is if we're able to offset those emissions by essentially buying into a scheme which sequesters carbon from the atmosphere at the same rate that we're still releasing it. And that would have to be done every year until we effectively reduced our carbon to zero. So this is obviously, Councillor Flegg mentioned our offsetting principles earlier, which is a paper we were looking to take through to Cabinet. So this is perhaps one of the ways we might be able to achieve some of that offsetting in a way that people are happy with. I think it's also worth saying that when we've discussed this in the past, both at CEAC and indeed in Cabinet discussions with both councils, it's been unanimously agreed that if we're going to invest in offsetting schemes, they have to be doing something locally ideally within our own districts or certainly within at least the same county. And they have to have significant additional co-benefits, so maybe for nature recovery or for local communities. At the same time, we know that local authorities nationally are developing local nature recovery strategies, and as you know, Oxfordshire's was published in November. But what we also know is from government and from DEFRA that there is no magic pot of money to help us deliver the actions in the local nature recovery strategies. So we're going to have to look to new forms of nature finance to help us plug that gap and to bring new money into the sector to enable some of these actions to be achieved. And so this is what led to the formation of a partnership between the 4 district councils in Oxfordshire, so Vale, South, West Oxfordshire and Cherwell, together with the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership. And we made an application to Innovate UK to investigate options for enabling nature-based carbon offsetting in Oxfordshire. Okay, so we were lucky enough to win the funding, but I guess I need to start by outlining what it was we actually set out to try and achieve. So first of all, oops, apologies, I'm trying to get my screen to move on. There we go. So first of all, we looked at the current methods for estimating how much carbon natural habitats can sequester from the environment. And we looked at the current mechanisms for capturing that value. So some of you may have heard of the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Carbon Code. So the Woodland Carbon Code, there are a number of opportunities in Oxfordshire where farmers and landowners are looking at this, but at the moment there is quite a significant undersupply. So there's actually not, you can't buy a current Woodland Carbon Code unit in Oxfordshire. You can buy pending issuance units. So this is where the carbon sequestration will happen in future years. And as you may be aware, there is virtually no peat in Oxfordshire. I think the Vale has around sort of Cop Hill Fen area has some peat, but there is very little opportunity really for sequestration within peat. So we looked at what was the evidence for other habitats sequestering carbon. So maybe if you were creating new chalk grasslands or areas of wetlands and so on, are there other opportunities for carbon sequestration by developing different habitats? And carbon offsetting has been dogged by allegations of greenwashing since it started, really, and that's not been helped by sort of proliferation of international carbon offsetting schemes, some of which perhaps have somewhat dubious credibility. And so one of the things we wanted to look at was how can we develop a set of high integrity principles that give both the buyers and the sellers of credits confidence that their investments are actually being done in a way that they would be happy with and being done locally. We also wanted to understand and investigate what mechanisms there might be for setting up a marketplace for these nature-based carbon credits in Oxfordshire. And so these are sort of the 3 key questions, I guess, we posed at the beginning. And the answers to these key questions are now contained within these reports you see on the screen. So the first report looked at all the different carbon methodologies, so the ways we estimate the amount of carbon which is sequestered by different habitats. The second one looked at this idea of developing a high integrity marketplace in Oxfordshire. And the third one looked at how that might be implemented so that carbon could be sold locally. And then the final report really just is a sort of a summary report bringing together the findings of the previous 3 in a sort of a more digestible format. Okay, so in order to inform these key pieces of work, we also commissioned a number of pieces of consultancy work, which were set to help us answer some of the key questions. So we needed to know, well, what is the current demand for carbon in the county, and what's the future demand likely to look like? We wanted to understand more about the potential supply of nature-based carbon. So which farmers and landowners were going to be persuaded to actually change their land uses to allow habitats to be created that sequester carbon, and would they be interested in getting involved in these sort of new markets? And we wanted also to understand the supply of carbon from the habitats that are being suggested as priorities within the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. So this, again, as I said at the beginning, one of the key reasons for doing this work was to look at how we might be able to help bring new green finance in to deliver some of the projects within the Local Nature Recovery Strategy. And this resulted in the production of 3 reports. So the first one was produced by a company called CEAC, and they were commissioned to help us understand the nature-based carbon market. And it was looking at, well, who were the customers and what those customers would be willing to pay. So this is not just local authorities, this is all sorts of businesses and small and medium scale enterprises in the county. And also what sort of practical arrangements would those customers want if they were to get involved in a market. The second report was produced by Forum for the Future, and they were asked to engage with landowners. So this is looking at the supply side, and to think about things like, well, what makes landowners more or less likely to get involved in a carbon market, and what are the issues that landowners have, and what are the challenges that are preventing them sort of getting involved in these new initiatives to start with. And then the final report, it was commissioned from the Leverhulme Centre for Nature Recovery. So they're part of Oxford University. And this was designed to quantify and map the carbon sequestration potential of the habitats that are proposed within the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. Now, in addition to the sort of more academic reports and the findings from those, one of the other things we had the opportunity within this project was to actually invest in some real world applications for trying out some of these things. And so we've used some of the IUK funding to try and stimulate the market for nature-based carbon. And we invested in 2 projects. The one you see on your screen here is the first one. And in this, we part-funded a study to identify potential natural flood management opportunities in the Cherwell catchment. Now, this is being led by an organisation called the North East Cotswolds Farmer Cluster. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of them, but they're part of what's called a government funded landscape recovery project, and they're one of the largest and probably most innovative farmer clusters in the country, and they're doing a lot of pioneering work to find ways of bringing different income sources and income streams into farming, primarily to help sort of protect the environment and so on. So the purpose of this work was to identify opportunities to undertake natural flood management interventions on different farming holdings. So this was looking at where you've got issues with flooding downstream. Can you put in things like leaky dams and swales and bunds and things which prevent the water from flowing off the land so fast? Now, this has a number of sort of co-benefits. It also helps to improve biodiversity in those areas, as well as the creation of those habitats, particularly wetland, are a great carbon sink, and they sequester a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. So there were 2 other elements to this. And the idea being that it may be possible to sell not only the natural flood management work, as well as carbon credits and potentially biodiversity credits. So there's a potentially 3 new income streams, which help resolve some existing problems that farmers and communities in that area had. So the second piece of work we funded was looking at the carbon and biodiversity potential of a site called Burney Hill Community Woodlands. So Nicholson's were appointed to undertake a baseline ecological study of the woodland and to estimate the carbon sequestration potential of the habitats. And we're hoping that this will allow the site owners to make informed investment decisions on how they develop the area further and how they might be able to tie it in with the emerging carbon markets and with future biodiversity markets. Okay, so these are some of the things we set out to do in the project, but this was an Innovate UK funded project. Now, the nature of innovation projects are that you don't actually know what the outcome is going to be when you start, or even whether you're going to be successful. So inevitably, in undertaking this project, we had a number of challenges. Firstly, evidence. So there is an enormous wealth of literature on the carbon sequestration potential of different habitats. However, there are as many pieces of learned literature as there were as many variables that impact the rate of carbon sequestration for any given habitat. Obviously, the weather being one, the soils, the geology, the slope aspect, the type of management which is going on, and so on. All of these things affect the rates at which different habitats sequester carbon. Now, I've mentioned already that we have a couple of carbon codes already in place, the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Carbon Code, which have been established for quite a while. And essentially, that's because that's based on empirical evidence, which has been tested over many years, and it's been proven that those habitats do sequester carbon at a certain rate. For most of the other habitats that we'd be looking to develop, that level of evidence is still not there. We know that there is a lot of potential in wetlands for carbon sequestration. We know that grasslands offer a lot of potential, but at the moment, there's still quite a lot of research that needs to be done that would allow us to draw any meaningful conclusions in terms of setting up a scheme to market that carbon. We also found that engagement with suppliers, so this is farmers and landowners, was problematic. Now, during the course of this project over the last sort of 18 months, there've been quite a lot of flip-flopping in government decisions and policies in the farming environment, not least to do with things like the inheritance tax rules around farming, but also the sustainable farming incentive came and went and may be coming back again. And I think that there's a lot of farmers who've essentially got fatigue over this whole lot, and they're essentially sitting it out and waiting to see what's happening. So they weren't that keen to engage, which made certain parts of the work quite difficult. There's also an added complication in that farmers are being pushed by their customers, so the supermarkets and some of the big buying groups, to demonstrate that their farms are net zero in themselves. So organisations like Sainsbury's, for example, have a target themselves to be net zero by 2030. So they're pushing this on to their suppliers. So farmers are essentially looking at their own land holdings, looking at what carbon they can sequester, and they're using it to demonstrate that they meet a net zero target, in which case, if they're all doing that, and it's by no means clear that they are all doing that, but obviously that does reduce the number of potential options there are for buying carbon for third parties. Equally, so that was the difficulty had with the suppliers of carbon credits. So we had issues in actually engaging with the buyers. So these are not so much the local authorities, because clearly we were party to the project, but these are the businesses. So some of the larger businesses were more interested in this because they employ people to think about carbon, and they often have carbon zero targets themselves. So there was some engagement with them, but most of the businesses in the Vale are sort of the small and medium scale enterprises, and they simply don't have the knowledge. They don't know what this whole thing's about, and they don't have specialist people within their organisations who we can go and talk to. And one of the key issues we had in engaging with them was that there is a lack of a push factor, which is essentially legislation. So if you think about drawing a sort of a parallel between this and biodiversity net gain. So biodiversity net gain has only really become a thing nationally as a result of government legislation which mandates it. We haven't got currently national legislation which mandates business having to limit or offset their carbon emissions. And until that comes in, I think a lot of businesses are simply not going to engage in this market. And then finally on this slide, so the price of carbon is currently simply too low for projects to be viable. On average, carbon, and this may even be a high average, is worth about £50 a tonne sequestered. We know of, and this is too low to actually allow farmers and others to get engaged in the market. So in order to get involved in a carbon market, there are some very high upfront costs for surveying the land, and farmers and landowners would need to create the habitats before they're able to sell any credit. So there's a very high upfront costs in doing all of the due diligence, in getting involved with the various different marketing mechanisms and then creating the habitats. And if the price of carbon is too low, there's no reason that actually farmers are going to change what they're doing. So those were some of the challenges, but what have we actually managed to achieve? And this is probably the more interesting part, and maybe the bit I should have focused on more, but anyway, hopefully you'll find this interesting. So the project has significantly increased our understanding of the challenges and issues that we need to address in setting up carbon markets in Oxfordshire. And a large part of the IUK funding and their reason for doing this is about upskilling organisations like local authorities in these areas. So it's succeeded spectacularly in that we've got 4 local authorities and the local nature partnership involved in this partnership, and we all know heaps more than we did when we started, so it's been successful. We have a much better understanding now of how sort of wider policy, for instance, things like the local nature recovery strategy, can help to stimulate and guide markets for nature-based carbon sequestration. And we know that in order for projects to be viable, quite often they're going to need to deliver significant other benefits. So I mentioned the price of carbon being too low. We're aware of a few schemes which have happened quite recently, actually, where farmers and landowners have managed to bundle together different nature services with carbon. So, for example, thinking about environmental and social responsibility agenda for some of the bigger companies and things. So they've managed to bundle together things like employee volunteering opportunities together with carbon to actually enhance the value of those credits they're selling, which enables them to make some money from the projects. We've estimated and mapped the carbon sequestration potential of the measures proposed in the Oxfordshire local nature recovery strategy. So this is a really good way of helping us to, in future, to target our work to within the LNRS area towards those habitats which are going to perhaps generate income for landowners, but while still delivering the LNRS priorities. And the insights we've gained in the project, and particularly around the very high costs of entering into these markets, have helped the development of a solution such as the what's called the Oxfordshire Nature Recovery Fund. So this is a circular loan fund which has been set up by the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment the purpose of that is to help landowners to finance those high upfront costs. So they can borrow from this fund at no interest rates, or low to no interest rates, in order to help them pay for those high upfront costs. And then the payback would come only once they actually start to sell credits from the schemes. We have successfully developed a set of county-wide principles for developing a high integrity marketplace. In actual fact, we've actually already started using these on the existing biodiversity net gain schemes, because there was a concern, I think probably nationally, that some of these new biodiversity net gain schemes that have been set up are perhaps not particularly the sort of ones we would like to see moving forward. So the local nature partnership has set up what they call the Nature Mark scheme, and we're actually employing the principles we've developed as part of this project as a way of ensuring that the projects that are going forward onto that particular website are those sort of high integrity BNG projects. As part of the project, we've developed an outline concept for a single farm carbon payment. Now, if you look at any given land holding, obviously for most of them, their primary objective is to firstly grow food, and secondly turn a profit. And therefore, opportunities to do carbon sequestration projects on any given piece of land might be limited to a few smaller areas. And at the moment, if a farmer or landowner wanted to get involved in this sort of stuff, well, they might be able to plant some hedgerows, they might be able to plant a small block of woodland, they might be able to do some regenerative agricultural practices and various things like this. Now, at the moment, that landowner will have to go to 4 different carbon codes in order to sell those 4 benefits. Now, if you bear in mind what I said about the high costs of getting involved in these schemes, if you've got to do that 4 times over, no landowner is going to bother to do that because it's just too much work and they don't have the time. They're too busy farming. So is it possible to bundle all that together? So a bit of hedgerow planting here, a bit of soil carbon over here, a bit of woodland carbon over here, into a single package which you can then sell on. Now, we recognise that there may not be a lot of point doing this at simply an Oxfordshire scale, and this might require a sort of a national approach. And there are a number of developing sort of farm-wide carbon schemes, which again, most of those are sort of still relatively early days. But at the moment, there are 4 different versions of a farm-wide carbon code, which again creates a problem in itself for landowners. And through our engagement with both the buyers and sellers, we've done a lot in terms of we've learned a lot from it, and we've raised a lot of awareness of the project and the potential benefits of nature-based carbon amongst both our landowners and our businesses. And one of the things we have identified is an option for developing a voluntary market, a so-called coalition of the willing. So again, drawing an analogy with biodiversity net gain. So you'll be aware that the VOWH pioneered sort of biodiversity net gain in 2013 when we signed the first biodiversity net gain agreement. And we continue to pioneer in that area. And throughout all of that time, up until the point where it became a mandatory requirement in 2024, we were essentially operating a voluntary market where we brought interested parties together. In this case, it was developers and landowners, and we allowed a transaction to take place between those 2 organisations, which allowed each of them to, firstly, farmers to make money, and the developers to meet their, as it was, no net loss requirements for biodiversity. So we think there is a potential to do something similar for carbon markets, where we can bring those buyers and sellers together to develop that early market initiative. And as I've already mentioned, the investment made by the project has helped to stimulate the supply of nature-based carbon in a couple of locations. So what next? I think it's worth saying, first of all of the project partners are committed to continuing this project. So just because of the Innovate UK funding is now finished, this isn't the end of the road for us. And we are going to continue to look at ways of developing this market further and potentially, to put forward Oxfordshire as a bit of a national exemplar. I would say we were a national exemplar when it came to developing some of those early biodiversity net gain markets, and we'd like to replicate that for nature-based carbon. And one of the early, although Oxfordshire County Council weren't a partner to this project, they've seen the potential in this, and they've agreed already to put up some of the funding to help recruit a green finance development manager who will be taking a lot of this work forward over the next few years. We also want to further develop this idea of the coalition of the willing, because we see this as a potential way of helping get that early market to get moving. And we're going to focus sort of the implementation of the market in its first case on the existing carbon code, so which is basically the woodland carbon code. But what we want to do is to allow for other codes. So there is currently a hedgerow carbon code in development, a soil carbon code in development, and there is an approach called wilder carbon, which has been developed by the wildlife trusts, which again we want to look at. And as these schemes become established and accredited, we would like to add these into the mix so that there is a wider range of opportunities for landowners to get involved. We're also going to be working closely with the Zero Carbon Oxfordshire Partnership. And this is primarily to look at ways we might be able to aggregate the demand for nature-based carbon from various different people who want to buy carbon credits, so that we could potentially offer sort of forward purchase agreement things to landowners. So again, that sort of helps to overcome some of the high upfront costs for landowners for entering this market. We also want to look at ways that we might be able to package together carbon sequestration with other environmental social governance benefits. I mentioned the sort of idea of employee volunteering, because this is if the carbon prices aren't going to increase to a point where landowners are going to get engaged, then we need to find ways of adding extra value so that those landowners can get the money they need to get themselves involved in the project. In the sort of medium term, we're looking to work with partners to develop something called a land function exchange. Now, this is something that came out of the report that was produced for us by 3Keel. So this has a slightly broader focus than just carbon, but it looks at all sorts of other nature-based solutions. So I mentioned the Cherwell project that we invested in earlier. So it could potentially bring in money for natural flood management and from various other ecosystem services we could sell from a single marketplace. We're looking at the potential, as I've already said, to adapt the Nature Mart shopfront to incorporate nature-based carbon. And we want to do all we can to support farmer clusters and groups of landowners to get involved in this sort of work. So I've mentioned already sort of all the pioneering work that's going on in the North East Cotswolds farmer cluster. Some of you may be aware that we also have a landscape recovery project in Southern Vale. So it's the Och and Tame landscape recovery project. Now they're sort of 18 months behind the North East Cotswold farmer cluster, but there's a lot of potential there for them sort of following the same footsteps and working with sort of large groups of farmers to find ways of developing new markets for carbon and BNG and other and all sorts of other products. So finally, all of the project reports that I've mentioned and I pinged up on the screen earlier are now available on the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership website. So you can go away and read them yourselves. And there is a lot of information. And so really all I've done today is graze the surface of what is an enormous subject. So we will be sharing these slides with you as once today's finished. So you'll be able to take that the link I've put there down once that's been shared with you. And that's all from me. So I'm open to take any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Don. Do you have any questions? A huge amount of information to take in. It's a impressive feat of summarisation. Quick question from me, what everyone else is thinking. It strikes me that, well, I'm very much in support of carbon sequestration and regenerating biodiversity on farmlands. We do also need to balance that against the need for food security in this country, and we don't want to turn over all of our valuable agricultural land to these sort of schemes. Is that something that's covered in the reports?
So yes and no. So we focused the projects to a large extent on how we might deliver this stuff within the local nature recovery strategy area. Now, that project deliberately focused on the less productive land. So by nature of what you're doing, you're kind of moving away from the most productive land. And frankly, I think farmers' first and foremost priority is always to deliver. If you speak to any farmer, that's what they'll tell you, if they're a proper farmer, as opposed to some of the new entrants to the market. So I don't think that's a particular risk.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor James.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. That was really exciting and interesting to hear about all of that and that level of innovation. As I know, it hit a lot of challenges, but that was just really exciting to hear. Is there anything that as ward councillors we can do? Should we just in like talking to people in our areas, perhaps? I mean, I know, like my area's got high energy use science bits and it's got farmers and things.
Yeah. In time, yes. I mean, despite the fact we've finished the funded part of this project, there's still an awful long way to go, and there's a lot of work to be done to really communicate with farmers and landowners. So interestingly, in your ward, that was one of the farmers that we have spoken to, and it was actually that farmer that was telling me about this issue they have with their suppliers demanding of them that they are net zero in themselves. So yeah, it's making those links, I think, with perhaps farmers who have an eye to sort of innovation and thinking about how they might supplement their incomes, because it's about supplementing rather than, this won't replace the income from their primary objective, food production. But if any of you are aware of farmers that are involved in this, what we can do is put them in touch with the farmer clusters and other things, which is who we're engaging with as our sort of primary audience.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thanks. That was really interesting, and it is quite exciting to know that we are being quite progressive in Oxfordshire, and especially our area. I think generally we are quite a proactive group of farming community. We're lucky in that aspect, and it is quite a lush area. So I guess we're richer farmers maybe, but I'll leave that for you to decide. I've got a really basic question. I'm almost embarrassed to ask it, but I'm going to ask it because I bet there are other people that want to know. If a farmer is, say, growing carrots, they grow carrots, and if the crop is good, they get more money than they were expecting, I'm guessing. And if the crop is rubbish, they don't, but they might get a subsidy because they're crop failed, for instance. How do they get money out of carbon capture? Like, how is that monitored and who pays them?
Yeah. Okay. So if a farmer wanted to enter into one of the existing carbon codes, let's say the woodland carbon code, they identify an area of their farm, their land, where perhaps it's low productivity, don't have much other use for it, and maybe they're thinking about timber markets in the future, so they might, in the longer term, be able to make an income from it. So they'd first of all get a baseline survey of their land, so this relates to all the upfront cost issues I mentioned. They would then, which would then tell them what you've got now, what your potential is. You would then develop a planting scheme, and you go to somebody like the Woodland Carbon Code. And if you go into one of these codes, they ask you to input a whole variety of different pieces of information in terms of the types of planting you want to do, the species of trees, and so on and so forth. And because there's been quite a lot of research into the rates at which different species of tree sequester carbon, we know that over a period of time, this species of tree will sequester this much carbon and others will. Anyway, this aggregates it all together and they will know what the carbon sequestration potential of that woodland is. So they'll know how much carbon it sequesters per year. They can then sell that sequestration as a carbon unit to somebody who wants to buy it. So the people who want to buy it, so where does the money come from? I think you asked. Well, we do as a local authority potentially. If we want to demonstrate we're being net zero, we need to demonstrate we're investing in a project that is drawing down as much carbon from the atmosphere as we're still emitting. So we and businesses and others who are interested in ensuring that they can demonstrate that they are carbon neutral or net zero are the ones who are going to be paying for this, and they'll be paying for it annually until they no longer have that requirement, until they've stopped burning fossil fuels or whatever they're doing. And it's different for different. So you can also do it through soil carbon, regenerative agriculture, by allowing more biomass into the soils and so on. And that sequesters a certain amount of carbon, and different habitats will sequester it at different rates.
Okay, so if I don't know, I was a farmer and I, let's say, had 40 acres of my land at the moment, which was a pheasant shoot, and I'm not going to do the pheasant shooting anymore because it's not viable, or maybe I am. Maybe I'm going to do all this research and do the capture, you know, and then sell my units for this, you know, the capture. But I also want to run my pheasant farm on that. Could I do that?
Yes.
Or do I have to plant new things?
Well, it depends. So, I mean, yes, it doesn't prevent. So most natural habitats require some intervention. So grasslands require grazing. So you could take an arable field. I'll give you a slightly different example. You could change it to species-rich chalk grassland. You still need to graze that every year. So you're still producing sheep or cows or whatever from that grassland, or possibly even milk. So you can still make other sources of income by continuing to grow food, as well as having this as an additional top-up to those other opportunities.
So it's highly likely that there's a lot of carbon capture going on that isn't being monitored
all the time. But this is bringing it into a framework where we've calculated how much carbon a certain intervention is allowing. And there is some science behind that. So you're not just making it up, and you're then selling that as a product, as opposed to what's happened throughout the whole of history, where people do stuff and it sequesters carbon, but you don't recognise that in any way.
I guess that's my point. So who monitors that? So if I don't know, I plant a load of trees, and 3 years on they die, and I just decide to, you know, not bother anymore. But I still, you know, who is monitoring that I've still got trees there and that they're paying for what they're getting, if you like.
All of these schemes have quite detailed monitoring and verification requirements. So the Woodland Carbon Code, there is a whole a bunch of stuff they have to do. They have to survey it every few years to demonstrate that things are still working. So there are checks and balances, and this was part of this high integrity principles we were talking about. So for all of these habitats, there are checks and balances to make sure that what is what they're claiming when they set out is actually being delivered in the real world.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. I think in the interest of time, it's getting a bit late. We might move on to the final item, unless there are any burning questions for Dominic now. All right, thank you. On to the final agenda item, and that is future agenda items. So, as mentioned, Candida.
Hi there. I just wanted to make note that when we get to about, I think in terms of the 2.5 hour cut off for meeting time in the Constitution, we might want to wrap this up in a few minutes if possible, rather than vote to extend. Okay.
Well, the item says committee to receive any updates on task and finish groups, and there have been none, so that's quite quick. And to discuss future items. Absolutely, if anyone has any future items they'd like to mention now, that's absolutely fine. But of course, you can always email as well if anything occurs to you later on, or your thinking behind it is quite lengthy. Then do feel free to email that to me or whoever the next CEAC chair will be come early January. But if anyone has any burning and short ideas now, then please do fire away. Councillor James.
I was just going to suggest that that we get the progress reports back on the net zero reports on the council operations and the wider district ones, and that may well have been the plan anyway.
There certainly has been some discussion around having CEAC meetings at different times, possibly even more but shorter meetings, so that we can align it with things like the net zero progress reports. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? No. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your inputs this evening. It's been a long meeting, but I think a really quite a valuable one. We've covered a lot of ground. So yes, thank you all very much, and see you in June, if not before, and possibly together with Sam.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.